Hi, welcome back to the basement. I'm Steve Lewis. Today I'd like to carry on looking at some of the interesting information and perspective that have come in through viewer comments recently. Not surprisingly, there was a lot of love expressed for the Beach Boys' Holland album when it was discussed. One thing that kind of surprised me was the amount of affection that there is among Beach Boy fans for California Saga California. It's a great track and I certainly wouldn't argue, but the depth of feeling and the strength of feeling among Beach Boy fans for that particular track kind of surprised me. It's good to know. Also, in the episodes about 1972 and in discussing Holland, we had talked about Brian's reluctance to join the group in Holland, going to the airport at least a couple of times before he got on a flight, and then temporarily going missing at Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam when he arrived. On episode 197, U.S. Pop Culture 1973 Part 5, our UK correspondent Chris Rainbow recalled hearing an interview on Radio 1 that Brian had given during his trip to Holland. Chris remembers that Brian said he didn't like flying and had stayed behind in California to finish off some projects before joining the band in Holland. Chris says that Brian sounded alert and upbeat, full of ideas and enthusiastic about the group and the upcoming sessions in Holland. I'm sure Brian's moods and levels of engagement could be changeable, but this really contrasted with the sullen, confused image I had of Brian in 1972, and in particular on his trip to Holland. Chris says it was the last interview where he heard the younger sounding Brian. I thought that was really interesting and surprising given the lore that's grown up around that trip. Thanks for letting us know about that, Chris, and I hope I'll run across that interview one of these days. On episode 193, Holland Part 1, I mentioned the KGB version of Sail on Sailor released in 1976 that had almost completely different lyrics, apparently those which were written by Ray Kennedy. Viewer Simple Chronology liked the bluesier approach of the KGB version and mentioned that one of the reasons the lyrics might have been rewritten was to remove the overt drug references in lines like, "And the thunder and the lightning aren't as frightening when you're coked out. Heartbreak City ain't so pretty when you're down and nitty gritty." I hadn't caught those particular lyrics before, and I can't imagine them making it onto a Beach Boys album. It certainly makes sense that that would have been at least part of the reason for the lyrical change. Thanks for pointing that out. By the way, I really like your screen name, Simple Chronology. It makes it a little hard to know how to refer to you casually because it doesn't seem polite to call you Simple. I guess I call you SC or something. Anyway, I really appreciate the feedback and for pointing that out. The KGB version of Sail on Sailor was also, as we mentioned, released as a single. It never hit the top 100, but apparently it got some notice. Paul Daniels recalled hearing it on the radio back in the day. We talked about some of songwriter Ray Kennedy's other credits. Viewer Meatwood Flack pointed out a really interesting and unusual credit. Ray Kennedy also supplied the singing voice of Beef in Brian De Palma's 1974 movie Phantom of the Paradise. Beef was played by Garrett Graham, but it's Ray Kennedy doing the singing. Phantom of the Paradise starred and featured songs by Paul Williams, who was a hugely popular personality at the time. More about him and about the movie when we talk about 1974. Thanks for letting me know about that, Meatwood. I had no idea. And also on the subject of Holland lyrics, Betamax Blocker posed a really interesting question. On the Beaks of Eagles track, there are a bunch of lines in the backing vocal right after the Thurso's Landing Shore part. Structurally, it reminds me of the Truck Drivin' Man lyrics that Dennis sings under the Who Ran the Iron Horse section of Cabanescence on 2020. Betamax Blocker asks what those lyrics are. I can't figure them out. If anybody knows, I would really appreciate you cluing us in. Of course, I've heard them for years, but I never really thought about it. Thanks for posing a very interesting question, Betamax, and I hope we'll get some response on that. On another subject, I recently became aware of a Beach Boy-related recording that I never knew about before. Just a few months after the Beach Boys were featured in the soundtrack of the movie Up the Creek, Mike Love was involved in a track on one of the big blockbusters of the summer of 1984, The Karate Kid. Considering that it was a mid-80s movie aimed at a younger audience, the soundtrack album is surprisingly obscure and nondescript, with unmemorable songs, mostly by pretty obscure artists. The second song on the album, Bop Bop on the Beach, is written by Mike Love, with production credited to Mike Love, Adrian Baker, and Brooks Arthur, who was the music supervisor on the album. The song is credited to the Flirts and Jan and Dean. The Flirts were a project by New York-based music impresario Bobby Orlando, who billed himself as Bobby O. The group members were an ever-changing trio of female session singers and models. The main musical criteria seemed to be that there had to be one blonde, one brunette, and one redhead, like the daughters from Petticoat Junction. They never landed anything in the US Top 100, but had some success on the dance chart in the early and mid-80s. Their single Passion went to number 4 in Germany and number 21 on the US dance chart in 1982. Helpless, You Took My Love went to number 12 on the US dance chart in 1984, and You and Me went to number 1 on the US dance chart on November 9th, 1985. Bop Bop on the Beach features sections with prominent female vocals, which I assume are the Flirts. Jan and Dean, of course, need no introduction. I can definitely hear Dean in spots on the record. I'm not sure about the other male voices. There are a lot of them, and they're all trying to sound like the Beach Boys. It sure sounds like Mike Love on the choruses. If it's not Mike, it's certainly somebody trying to sound like Mike. The verses also sound like Mike, but it's not quite nasal enough for early 80s Mike Love, so I'm not sure. Ironically, the reason I doubt it's Mike is that it sounds too much like a good Mike Love vocal for this period of time. There also seem to be a lot of filters on the voices. Despite its vaguely Ramones-ish title, Bop Bop on the Beach is a completely standard early Beach Boys played like the 80s pastiche. It's deliberately made up of the biggest cliches found in early Beach Boys records. The lyrics are about checking out the beach to see if it's your scene. It seems tailor-made for the Karate Kid movie. In the film, it's used in a short scene where Ralph Macchio's Daniel, newly arrived in Southern California from New Jersey, plays soccer on the beach and catches the eye of Allie, played by Elizabeth Shue. In a way, I suppose it's a real tribute to the Beach Boys that their sound is used in movies and on TV to establish that the setting is Southern California, the same way a few notes of Rule Britannia establish that the setting is London. The track is forgettable and deliberately cartoonish, but for a completist, it's a Mike Love song with what sounds like an uncredited Mike Love vocal performance. The soundtrack's hit, according to the hype sticker, is Survivor's The Moment of Truth. Between being co-written by Bill Conti, who had a #1 hit with Gonna Fly Now, the theme from Rocky in 1977, and performed by Survivor, who had a #1 hit with Eye of the Tiger from Rocky III in 1982, you can guess what they were going for. Here's a snippet of the lyrics. It's the moment of truth. You're giving it all, standing alone, willing to fall. If you can do it, get up and prove it. As you might guess, it's almost as much of a self-parody of a Survivor song as Bop Bop on the Beach is a parody of a Beach Boys song. The Moment of Truth will spend 2 weeks at number 63 on the chart beginning July 7th, 1984. The rest of the soundtrack is filled out with very, very 1984 sounding tracks that sound like they're by, but are not by, Human League, The Romantics, Hall & Oates, Devo, and many others. In fact, what I really had fun with this soundtrack was playing it and listening for the song they wished they had, going like, oh, that's meant to be the Cars, oh, that one's meant to be Pat Benatar. You can have a great time with this playing Name the Tune They Wish They Had Licensed. Spend a little time with this soundtrack and you will find yourself so immersed in the 80s, you might feel like you need a shower. Recently, I read the new John Stamos memoir, If You Would Have Told Me. As I had hoped, the book contains a few interesting Beach Boy anecdotes. I didn't expect any big revelations or anything, and I didn't get any, but it was interesting. I should have realized, too, that since this isn't a book about the Beach Boys, a lot of the space Stamos devotes to them has to be about bringing readers up to speed on who they are and where they were career-wise when he met them. Of course, I bought it for the Beach Boys connection, but I found it interesting enough to read all the way through. Stamos is thoughtful and self-deprecating enough to remain likable. It's an enjoyable and breezy read, especially compared to another new memoir that I read just prior to that. I had really been looking forward to Bernie Taupin's memoir. Turns out, if you're interested in long, detailed descriptions of where he likes to go on vacation, how drunk he could get, or what his hobbies are, this is the book for you. There are some descriptions about his early days working with Elton John, but he doesn't really seem to add much new, and most of the interesting things about his career he doesn't seem to remember. And to give you an idea of his writing style, here's an excerpt about going into one of those clip joint bars that they have in Paris. In total contradiction to its embrace of kitsch and lethargy, everything seemed to revolve around this lively planet suspended in a vacillating solar system. The conviviality was immediately intoxicating, and in no time at all we were drawn in and engulfed in a sea of rollicking frivolity. If you can wade through nearly 400 pages of that kind of writing, you'll get Bernie sharing his version of introducing Brian Wilson to John Lennon repeatedly at a party at the home of Dean Martin's ex-wife Jean in 1974. It's an anecdote that's pretty well known from Alice Cooper, who was also there. Cooper recalls it almost the same way as Bernie Taupin, except in Alice's memory, it happened backstage after the Grammys in 1974. If you're not familiar with that story, you can easily find it online, and anyway, Alice Cooper tells it better. Between the writing style and many pages of nothing of particular interest to anybody but him happening, I have to say I found Bernie Taupin's memoir to be a disappointment and a pretty hard slog. The main revelation that I came away with was that of the two of them, Elton John is the one who's introspective and relatable. Next up for me reading-wise is Kenneth Womack's Living the Beatle Legend, The Untold Story of Mal Evans. Reportedly, it's based on the unfinished memoir that Mal Evans was working on at the time of his death in 1975. I've always thought that was potentially a very interesting read. If you've read this or any of these books, I'd love to know what you think. Don't worry about spoilers on the Mal Evans book. Even though I haven't read it yet, I suspect the Beatles break up at the end. Having read the Stamos and Taupin memoirs, I'm struck that almost all celebrity memoirs, while the anecdotes may differ, follow the same general trajectory: obscurity and ambition, success, downfall, and redemption through family. And I'm now realizing that almost every celebrity memoir follows the plot of the Steve Martin movie, The Jerk. Getting back to the Beach Boys and going all the way back to 1986, and the Sunkissed Presents 25 Years of Good Vibrations album, we had talked about the use of Good Vibrations and California Girls in Sunkissed commercials. James Watson remembered a late 70s or early 80s Nerf commercial that used Surfin' USA. Michael Lukens located a 1985 Nerf baseball and softball commercial that used the song. James Watson remembered the jingle having lyrics like, "If everybody had a Nerf ball across the USA." The Nerf baseball commercial is instrumental apart from Nerfin' USA. So I suspect Nerf used the song in other commercials as well. Like the Sunkissed commercials, the music in the Nerf commercial isn't performed by the Beach Boys, of course, but I thought it was interesting. If anybody remembers a different version of that Nerf commercial or any other commercials that use Beach Boy songs as jingles, I'd love to know about them. And I wanted to pass along a question from WF Productions 80s as to who the actor in the videos for Get You Back and It's Getting Late is. IMDb identifies the woman as Katherine Kelly Lang, who since 1987 has been a star of the CBS soap opera The Bold and the Beautiful. The male actor isn't identified. It's a good question and I'd love to know the answer too. If anybody has that information, please pass it along. Also, while talking about 1986, I had said that Matlock represented Andy Griffith's return to series television after the popular Andy Griffith Show in the 1960s. J.L. Draw let me know that that was not strictly true, that Andy Griffith had had two other series between the Andy Griffith Show and Matlock. In the fall of 1970, he was back in the title role of Headmaster, a comedy drama starring Jerry Van Dyke, Parker Finelli, and Claudette Nevins. The opening theme, Only a Man, was sung by little-known vocalist Linda Ronstadt. As JL succinctly points out, the series was basically CBS's answer to Room 222, with Griffith as the head of a California prep school. In keeping with the times, each week Andy's headmaster would grapple with some relevant issue of the day. It lasted 14 episodes, ending its run on January 1st, 1971. 1 week later, Andy Griffith was back in the same time slot with a retitled series and a completely new format. The new Andy Griffith show dropped all the social relevance. This one was much closer to the original Andy Griffith show, with Andy as the mayor of a small North Carolina town. He was a family man with a wife, played by Lee Merriweather, a wacky sister-in-law, played by Ann Morgan Gilbert, the former Millie Helper of the Dick Van Dyke Show, and 2 kids played by Lori Rutherford and Marty McCall. The new irrelevant Andy Griffith show didn't fare much better, running only until May 21st, 1971. So I should have said that Matlock represented Andy Griffith's successful return to series television. Admittedly, those 2 other series are sort of blink and you'll miss it kind of things, but I shouldn't have missed them, and they're interesting footnotes in pop culture history. Thanks for letting me know about those, JL Draw. And before we go, I wanted to thank Martin Steele and Burlington Bill 1, both of whom recently sent me some interesting articles that are related to the Beach Boys. I'll be using those for research in upcoming episodes. And I'm getting a little collection of good Beach Boy reference materials together. I'm really happy about that. I'm sure my wife is delighted that I've got yet another collection, but at least this one doesn't take up much room. Thanks for sending me that information. And I wanted to thank people who commented on the 1933 episodes. Those were fun to put together, and it was a really interesting exercise. I enjoyed it. I don't think it's an experiment that I will repeat anytime soon, though I am kind of tempted to one day do a set on 1957. Over the next few weeks and on into the new year, I want to get back to talking about Carl Wilson featured appearances on other people's records. We haven't talked about the 1960s in a long time, and I'd like to remedy that by talking about the second half of 1964 and the All Summer Long album. I also want to talk about 1969, do an in-depth track-by-track on the 2020 album, and an episode about the Breakaway single. Of course, I think there'll be many other things that come up that aren't expected. There always have been. I'm hoping there'll be some cool surprises, some things that even I haven't come up with yet. So look forward to that. I also want to do 1974 and the Endless Summer album, but we'll do that a little bit later on. We're coming up on 4 years since this channel started, and I am so appreciative for all the great comments that come in. If I haven't mentioned your comment here, don't feel like it wasn't valued. Fortunately, there's so much information coming on, I can't get to all of it, but just try to hit the high points. That's another thing I want to do this year, is a few more of these kind of episodes so I can stay better caught up on that stuff. Anyway, thank you all very, very much for the support and the great comments and the great information. I've learned so much about the Beach Boys and so many other things. This has really been terrific. Been a lot of fun. Let's keep it up in the new year. Hope you had great holidays and full steam ahead. Thanks for watching. I look forward to your comments. Hope to see you next time. Bye.